Today we're going to talk about why your ex-boyfriend hasn't contacted you, and if you stick around until the very end of this video, I'm going to give you my best tips on how you can raise your chances substantially of having them contacting you finally. But if you're new to this YouTube channel or my websites, probably the first thing you're wondering is, should I even be trying to get my ex-boyfriend back? Now, if that's where you are, or where you feel like you are, I've got great news for you. On my website, www.exboyfriend.com, I've put together a special free 2-minute quiz that's designed to tell you what kind of chance you have in your specific situation, so you know whether or not you're going to be wasting your time. Now, all you have to do if you want to take this simple quiz is simply look in the description link below this YouTube video and click on the link you see there. With all of that out of the way, let's get into why your ex-boyfriend isn't contacting you. So, if you don't already know, I run this really quite big private Facebook support group full of men and women who are going through breakups, trying to get their exes back, or trying to move on from their exes. And what's interesting in there is, about a few months ago, I decided to run a poll. I was trying to determine how often exes would reach out during a no contact rule. Now, if you don't know what a no contact rule, it's basically this period of time where you're ignoring your ex on purpose with the intent of making them miss you, hopefully reaching out to you, but really we're finding people who really focus on themselves during no contact tend to do better. So what I was really trying to determine here was, how often will exes just reach out to you on their own accord? And I was also trying to understand, in those circumstances where exes don't reach out to you, what is the psychology there? And we learned something pretty shocking. You see, I had always been under the impression, ever since I started recommending no contact to my clients, that it was one of the best ways of making an ex reach out to you. The thinking, of course, being you're tapping into this theory of reactance. Essentially, you use the no contact rule on your ex, which essentially makes them want to reach out to you more because you've taken the behavioral freedom of just talking to you away. So they're going to react in a way to try to get that freedom back. But the results shocked me. In fact, they said the opposite. Right around 63% of exes who had the no contact rule done to them did not reach out to their ex-girlfriends. Now, what's going on there? Well, this is where things get kind of interesting. Around the same time that I started running this poll, I also started an initiative where I was going to try to interview one success story a week for my podcast. And the thinking there was, I was going to come into these success story interviews with a free frame of mind. I wasn't going to care if they followed my advice or not. I was simply looking at what they did that worked. And I learned something pretty fascinating about why exes don't reach out to you. You see, in talking with success stories, we got really a lot of indication on what happens with exes who don't reach out to you. Because what happens is, when they do get their exes back, they waltz on back to their ex and essentially just ask them like, hey, you remember that period of time where I was ignoring you? Why didn't you reach out to me? Here's what exes said. I didn't want to reach out to you first. So pride and stubbornness, and in this odd way, it kind of goes back into this really mundane concept of winning the breakup. It's almost as if exes reach out to you first, they feel like they're going to lose the breakup. So they think to themselves psychologically, I'm gonna wait until she reaches out to me first. That way I have the upper hand. But that still doesn't really help you, does it? I mean, you're coming to this video to watch it, number one, to understand why exes don't reach out to you. I just told you most of the time they're stubborn and they're waiting for you to reach out to them first. And number two, how can you get them to reach out to you? Well, this, I think, is where we have to kind of shine a light at my industry. Because in my opinion, my industry tells you a lie. They give you false expectations. Now, what is this false expectation? Well, I can't tell you how often I see this happening, and maybe it's the clickbait society that we live in, where people are making YouTube videos or podcast episodes or even articles with these super clickbaity titles where nothing really gets accomplished, where they're talking about like, oh yeah, if you say these 3 phrases, it'll make him come back to you and beg for you back. But you read the article and that's not what happens at all. They give you these false expectations about the fact that there's a magic bullet phrase, magic bullet text, magic bullet action that you can do that will make them want to come back. Yet when I deal with real life scenarios, that's not what I see happen at all. And honestly, this may be the hardest pill for you to swallow, but sometimes if you want your ex to reach out to you first, you have to earn that right. In other words, you have to be willing to swallow your own pride, reach out to them first, engage them in a satisfying conversation to the point where they get so hooked that they want to reach out to you the next day to continue the conversation or so on and so forth. And don't worry, we'll get into some of the tactics you can do to do this very thing, but right now it's the strategy as a whole. You need to get over the fact that there's no magic bullet phrase. I'm not gonna sit here and say like, oh yeah, this is the exact thing you need to say, and he'll just get on his knees and start texting you. No, in many cases where you have an extremely stubborn ex, the best way to get them into a pattern of reaching out to you first is to earn that right. But that begs the next question. How do you earn that right? Well, you're gonna do that with two theories that I've come up with. Theory number one, satisfaction theory. And theory number two, scarcity theory. Let's take a minute and talk about what these mean. So what is satisfaction theory? Well, basically the theory posits that human beings really only want to talk to people and have conversations with you if they feel extremely satisfied in the conversations with you. But how do you make a conversation satisfying? Well, that's a bit trickier. You see, most of the time I think when people reach out to their exes to try to start a conversation with them, they start off by talking about things that their ex just simply doesn't care about. And the rub here is it doesn't necessarily mean you need to start a conversation about something that he only cares about. Your perfect scenario really is where you start a conversation, you get him engaged in a conversation with something you're passionate about and he's just as equally passionate about. But that's only one aspect of the scenario. I mean, picking a topic is the easy part. How do you actually move forward in a conversation to where he's sitting back and thinking, wow, this is the best conversation I've had in a while? Well, it really boils down to you listening to what's not there. Now, how do you do that? Well, oftentimes I tell people that really, if you want to get ahead in life or have an intriguing conversation with someone, don't look at conversations as just these menial topics to talk about. And you talk about the topic and you're on to the next one. That's not really how it works. You see, you go through life, whether you realize it or not, with a certain philosophy. You have certain ways that you're going to deal with things. You have certain thoughts about items, so on and so forth. Your ex is the same way. He has his own philosophy about how life is handled and what works here, what works there. And a conversation between two people is basically two philosophies trying to merge, trying to be open to what the other person is saying. But here's the rub. Most of us are really afraid to tell the other what they really think for fear of being looked at as selfish or for a fear of being looked at as crazy. So one of the best ways to get someone to engage in a conversation is to take yourself out of your own worldview and put yourself in your ex's worldview. Walk a mile in his shoes and kind of think about what he's thinking but not saying. And then you simply just label what he's thinking back to him and he'll be drawn in. Now, it's pretty simple to put it like that. It's a lot more difficult to do in real life, but I'll give you an example. Let's say that your ex is a very, very big sports fan. So you kind of know he's an extremely big sports fan and something huge happened over the weekend relating to his sports team. But he also knows that you don't care about sports whatsoever. So in an attempt to be nice to you, he simply doesn't engage in any of the sporting activities. But you knowing him and knowing that it's this burning thing that he wants to talk about but is afraid of how he'll be perceived, should bring it up to him and say like, hey, I heard so-and-so was acquired this weekend. Or hey, I heard this big trade was happening with your sports team. This immediately gets him engaged in a conversation and leaves him with a satisfying feeling. Now, I do want to say one thing. Do not use this example on your ex. Try to think of something a little bit more powerful than sports. Sports was just simply the lowest hanging fruit to illustrate my point. Think outside the box. Okay, next we have scarcity theory. So what is scarcity theory? Well, it's essentially this idea that yes, you need to make your ex satisfied in conversations, but you shouldn't stick around until you overstay your welcome. Many of us have had these really long conversations with our significant others or ex-significant others, and you'll always notice there's a point where the conversation kind of tails off. You run out of interesting things to say, he runs out of interesting things to say, and then the awkward silences begin. All I'm saying is dip out of the conversation before those awkward silences begin. Now, the cool part about this is there's actually psychological theory that backs this up. It's called the Zeigarnik effect, which was popularized by Bluma Zeigarnik. She basically found out that when human beings are in the middle of a task and that task gets interrupted or it becomes incomplete, we have a hard time forgetting about that task. We obsess about it. The best example I can say to illustrate this point is, let's say that I knock on the house to your door. You let me in your house, but before you have a chance to close the door, I lead you around your house. The entire time you're thinking, that door is open. You start thinking about all the negative possibilities that can occur. Maybe a bug will fly in, you'll have to kill a wasp in the house or something like that. Maybe you're worried that your dog will get out and run away, but the more you think about it, the more you actually want to go and just close the stinking door. I won't let you. I lead you around the house. It becomes so prevalent in your mind, you just can't think of anything else. That is the Zeigarnik effect at work. Now, how do we apply this to conversations with our exes? Well, if you want me to level with you, probably the best way is to trust your gut. Internally, you're gonna have a feeling of when conversations begin to wane. And the second you have that feeling is the second you should leave the conversation. Now, what you're gonna find is that just doing this once, where you're kind of engaging your ex in a conversation, you get to the high point, the most important or exciting part of the conversation, you extend that for a little bit, and then you dive out using the Zeigarnik effect, you end the conversation. That's usually not gonna be enough to get them to reach out to you first. But what happens is if you consistently establish a pattern where you do this, your ex will just naturally want to reach out to you. And sometimes it never happens. And we have to be okay with that, because more important than anything isn't necessarily the scarcity of the conversation, but how satisfied your ex feels talking to you. Because ultimately, if it helped you get your ex back and all you had to do was start every conversation first, I think that's a valuable trade. Hey there, thank you so much for getting to the end of this video. Again, if you haven't already, make sure you take that quiz that I was talking about and telling you about at the beginning of this video. All you have to do is go to my website, www.exboyfriend.com, or simply look in the description link below this YouTube video and click on that link. Also, if you haven't liked, commented, or subscribed to my YouTube channel, every little bit helps. So make sure you hit that bell icon or the subscribe button, or just simply leave a comment and we will make sure that we do our very best to get you answers.